Are you ready for no more of this?
The church goes wild.
You're free to go.
Left or right?
After months of online services, lockdown is just about over, and we're excited to be gearing up for live church services right here in the building. As per the state's health orders, we have a COVID safety plan in place to maximise your peace of mind and your safety. Don't forget to check in. We have hand sanitizer stations on hand, plenty of disposable masks if you don't bring your own. We have appropriate seat spacing. Our website has extra information and everything is absolutely ready to go. We want to invite you and welcome you back to live church services here at the Potter's House, Parramatta.
Bible hour. Let's clap our hands, sing out that song, Mighty is Our God. Mighty is our God, mighty is our King, mighty is our Lord, creator of every. Mighty is our God, mighty is our God, mighty is our King, mighty is our Lord, creator of every. His name is higher, higher than any other name. His power is greater, 'cause He created everything. Mighty is our God, mighty is our God, mighty is our King, mighty is our Lord, creator of everything. Amen. Father, we pray that You'd speak to us through this adult Bible hour. Help us to have teachable hearts and anoint the message in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, good to be saved this morning. Good to be in the house of God. Bring the Easter greetings to all and sundry. I do see a little bit of a chocolate glow out there on people's faces, and no doubt you'll have a great day in the Lord. If you have a Bible this morning, we're in the book of Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, chapter 24, Proverbs 24, verse 3 and 4. We're in a series, Parenting with Purpose. Autopilot is for planes, and we are going to finish off a study we started a few weeks ago on boundaries, and spend some time looking at boundaries and believing that God can help us. Don't forget, if you have any questions, we have a question box at the back there. You can text me message questions. You can ask questions publicly in the service, obviously, and you can use the question box at the back there if you want to ask a question that's anonymous. I actually have a number of questions. Probably the last study we do will be all questions that I've received from various places over the last couple of months. And so they've kind of come in from different places, and we'll answer those. And it'll be a great conglomeration of things that are pressing on parents' hearts with regards to raising their kids. And so this morning we're in Proverbs 24, verse 3 and 4. I'll give you a quick update. Don't want to spend long on this so we can get through the rest of the study. Proverbs 24, verse 3 and 4. Through wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. We've been speaking about boundaries, and this really is, after all of the stuff we've done leading up to this really is the foundation stones, the practical outflow of a lot of the stuff that we have spoken about in the last few months. And so the idea is that we function best by boundaries. Books by Cloud and Townsend on boundaries, first sold in 1992, sold 4 million copies. Boundaries are essential to life, a successful life, and we looked at that. Boundaries help keep children safe and secure. Boundaries help children set limits on their life. Boundaries help children to incorporate their own personal willpower and their own ability to choose and make good choices. And so all that is there through boundaries. If you don't remove or whatever you don't remove or reward in a child's character when they're younger, then that remains with them into their adult years, and that becomes a lot harder to remove from them. We spoke about Numbers 33, verse 55. If you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you dwell. And we know that's the story of the children of Israel going to the promised land. God saying, listen, eradicate all of the opposition, all of those things that would be temptations. Remove those from your lives. What you don't remove will continue to be an harassment to you through the rest of your adult lives. And we know that to be true for the children of Israel. Proverbs 3:12 in the New Living Translation, the Lord corrects those He loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. And so some kids are crying out for boundaries. They're crying out for a loving parent that'll care enough to curb their behavior, set them on the straight and narrow path into their adult life. And so we've done that. A couple of things we looked at last week, and we'll bring us up to speed before we continue on about boundaries. Number one, be clear on exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And so mums and dads need to think through for each of their children at the age that they are age-appropriate boundaries. Think through what they're wanting to accomplish, what kinds of kids are they wanting to raise, biblical principles, character traits, attitudes of heart, all of those things. Think those things through and begin to guide the kids by boundaries and rewards, punishment and rewards to keep them on those things. I recommended starting with eating and sleeping and working those things through. This can be done from a fairly early age, and we spoke about that. I won't go over that again. Eating at certain locations, certain foods for certain times. The idea of chasing your kids around, it boggles my mind. Parents that are chasing their kids around with a spoon, trying to feed them, and whenever the kids like pigeons trying to come through, grab a bit of food, off they go again. You're just creating a nightmare for yourself. That dinner time, rather than being 30 minutes to an hour, could be 3 hours. And they've got food spread all over the house and so forth. Eating habits and boundaries and disciplines, as well as then sleeping. Boundaries, if you wonder why nobody's inviting you to their house, is because your kids are chaos. And if people knock back invitations to your house, it's because your kids are still chaos. And so you're not doing yourself any service by having kids out of control. And we spoke about that in some detail. Number two, be on the same page. We mentioned that never going to accomplish the desired outcome if you're double-minded or you have double standards. Think it through. Work out what you're trying to accomplish. What are the standards I'm trying to uphold in my family? And then mum and dad be on the same page. It's not I said, she said, he said, they said. It's simply a like-minded two people walking together, agreeing on the direction. Always provide a united front in front of the children. Always provide a united front in public. And the place to disagree would be privately. Hash out what you want to accomplish, and then as far as the kids are concerned, mum and dad are on the same page. No soft touch. No one's softer or harder than the other. They're both on the same page. Otherwise, they'll choose the weakest link. Kids are wonderful manipulators. And none of them are here. They're all in Sunday school and other places. They're wonderful manipulators, and I've seen some parents wonderfully manipulated by their children. The kids have got you wrapped around their little finger because you're not on the same page, and they're finding the weakest link. Number three, be precise. Less is more. I had a picture. I don't know if I showed this last time. But when it comes to establishing boundaries, less is more. In other words, you're just simply very clear. It's not a lengthy conversation. It's not an elaborate process. It's just simply, these are the instructions. These are the boundaries. This is what you need to be doing, and be online with that. I had a couple of photos there. Wes, have you got those? You do have those at the Gary Larson cartoons. A man speaking to his dog. If you can find those again for me, that'd be very helpful. Are they there somewhere? When you find the first one, put it up there, and then I'll know, because people less attention to me and more on the picture behind me. Any thought on that? All right. When their kids are younger, simple instructions: yes, no, stop, do more, etc., etc. Very simple instructions. As they get older, Teenagers, a little more information, a little more reasoning behind it, helping them to understand why you're doing what you're doing and helping them to form their own opinions as far as developing their own understanding of why they're choosing certain courses of action. And so at their age and at their level, you make sure you're very clear on what's expected. Some parents, it's a dodge 'em car style parenting. It's just random and out of the blue, and kids have got no idea what's going on. That's not very helpful. And so be precise. Less is more, and that is always a good thing. Number 4, be careful as possible to make punishment fit the crime. That's a little difficult, but you have to try and make sure that you're not just making up random punishments. If you can, make the punishment fit the crime. And James Dobson says to distinguish between willful defiance and childish irresponsibility. And when you're going to discipline your children at their age, it's helpful to rehearse what's happened. We said that this is what we expected. You agreed to that. Yes, they say. We agreed that this would be the punishment. Yes, we agreed to that. Therefore, this is the punishment. So they understand the process. It's not just a clip behind the ears for no apparent reason out of the blue and all random. You explain the process. You rehearse the process. The reward. We said this. You did what was required. Here is the reward for that. They understand the process. They see where that's come from, and that's also very, very helpful for that. Number 5, be diligent to follow through on any promised consequences. And so if you've said something, if you've made an agreement, if that's the boundary, if that's what the behavior is that you're expecting, you've got to follow through with that. The more you speak about a boundary that you don't reinforce, they're not sure whether we can cross the line. We crossed the line last week and got away with it. We do this, we're in trouble. We're just not sure what's going on. And so make sure that you're careful to follow through on any promised consequences, rewards, and punishment. If you're going to reward them for some type of behavior, there's going to be some benefit. We are going to do this. If this is the behavior that's been performed, then you've got to follow through with the rewards and make sure that that is there. Number 6 is be quick to reconcile. And this is once you've either rewarded, especially when you've punished some of them, make sure you reconcile. It's not, I don't want to see you get out of my sight, that kind of stuff. It's just simply rehearsing the punishment. That was the boundary. This was the agreed punishment. And once the punishment's been served, then you reconcile. You're not a bad kid. You're a good kid that's done something bad, and we agreed, and that's the consequence. We love you. We care about you. We always want to be your parents, and so you're quick to reconcile once you've been through the process. Proverbs 3:12, the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. And so it's a wonderful turn of phrase there. A father delights in his children. He is a father to them. He punishes bad behavior. He rewards good behavior. But they're always a child that they love, always a child in whom they delight in. And there's got to be reconciliation after there's been some punishment or some discipline. And then number 7 was be willing to review these on a regular basis. In other words, as time goes by, you realize, you know what, that boundary's not working. It's just not. We need to somehow adjust that. And so it's not set and forget for when they turn 3, and that's going to be in place until they're 16. Sometimes they need review. It's not working. Sometimes more kids come along. Things you did when the kids were just one child or 2 children, you got to be more strict when there's 3 or 4 or 5 if you're having that many kids. And so different things change, and you've got to respond to that as time goes by and make that work. Any quick questions there? We've covered some ground. Back.
One, two. To distinguish between, can you help me to distinguish between 3 things? Duties, reward, and compensations.
Say it again.
So can you help me to distinguish between duties? That's when they do something but they don't get a reward. It's their duty in the house. They have to do it. And reward, which is you just mentioned, and compensation is when you mow the lawn, I pay you such amount of money.
Well, again, money is only a couple of things. One is that money is only a reward to kids that understand what money is. Young kids have no idea what money is. They don't know how to use it. It doesn't mean anything to them. And so giving a young child 50 cents, $1, $2, $5, it's irrelevant. Sometimes I've known kids to exchange a $10 note for a $1 coin, thinking that because someone told them the $1 coin's worth more than the 10, so they give them the 10, take the $1. There's no you know what I'm saying? So the idea of monetary rewards is a good thing for teenagers, and kids are a little bit old. A well-oiled machine back there. That's the one. Okay, so when you speak to dogs, this is what you say, and all the details that are there, and then that's what we say to dogs, and then what dogs hear is blah 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 blah, and then the dog's name. And so the same with parents and kids. What you say to kids, you've got this flamboyant big explanation and talk. They don't hear that. They just hear blah 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 with nothing else. And so less is more was the point when it comes to raising your dogs and when it comes to training your children. Thank you for that, Wes. Very nice. So money rewards are only benefit to people who understand what money is and have a way of spending it. In a family, there are responsibilities and duties as part of the family. You're part of this family, and as a family, we are doing certain things to make the family function. And so that might be make your bed. That might be tidy your room. That might be help with the yard. That might be tidy up your toys. And as when a kid plays with all the toys, they'll pull all the toys away and put them all back in the toy box or back in the toy corner, or however your family system works. And so there's lots of things that they do which are simply, that is the way that life works. It's not reward or punishment. It's a duty. It's a responsibility. It's the response to privilege of being in our family. This is what we get to do. This is what you need to do, and those kinds of things. Once you start introducing pocket money is, number one, just simply a privilege. And so there's things that they would get pocket money for not just for doing the duties and the responsibilities. And then there'd be things beyond that to say, listen, I want you to do something extra for me that's beyond the general realm. And again, you'll have to work out what those things might be. And if you'll do that, there'll be a greater reward. And so that might be when kids are younger, a biscuit. It might be chocolate biscuits. It might be some other kind of once a week type of reward that's a benefit. If we do this, then on Sunday night we'll go out and buy ice creams at McDonald's. We're going to go out and get a McFlurry. Or we're going to do some other thing. And so there's just kind of that idea of a reward for things that are beyond what would be normally expected. You don't want to reward what's expected. It's expected. That's what you need to do. You've got to try and find those other things. Again, as kids get older and get that comprehension, but it's not something that's very effective on younger kids. They just simply don't have the capacity to understand what's required of them for those benefits. Okay, so you add three things, but there's a couple of things that are the duties and responsibilities, and then things on top of that you're looking for extra thing, or if you improve on these things, there'll be a reward, and it's got to be at that level. Very good. Somebody else. Boundaries. Yes, Sam.
Sorry, this might be a bit off topic, but I don't want to forget the question. What do you do if something's obviously happened and all of your kids are saying they didn't do it? I used to be able to stare into their soul and get them to crack, but I don't know, because it's they're all together. I don't know. I'm not as good at it as I used to be. So what would you do?
You're just as good as you used to be. They're becoming more devious.
Yeah.
as time goes by. Yeah, there's such a thing as group punishments. As if there's 3 of them that are there and 3 of them, somebody of the 3 knows who did it, then we punish all of them. Or they learn that if we lie, if nobody speak, life just goes on like nothing's happened.
I feel like I have done that before. Like I just hone in on the person I think's done it, and then like hoping the other person feels guilty enough, but like they don't care anymore. Like they used to feel bad, and so I don't. Like, is it fair to punish the ones that really didn't do it?
Well, again, because then they have to learn that at some point there's a place. If you're pressing in on, if it's something that's not that big deal, it's not a big deal. Life goes on. But something that somebody broke something, somebody ate something, somebody stole something, somebody's damaged something a little larger than just the casual stuff, and somebody knows who did it, then we're all punished.
But what if no one knows? Like they would dob on each other 100% straight away if they knew, but it's in the times that like no one knows who's done it.
Then again, then 3 of them know that they didn't do it.
Yes.
So they know that if they all know that they didn't do it, then they know who did it.
Well, they have to pick out of the other 3 though.
Correct. They have to. Okay. Again, I'm not. It's not a policeman, but we're going to sit there until we get this done. And if we don't,
you would definitely just like a punishment has to be.
Well, again, you wouldn't want them to think that if just silence is rewarded. So again, I don't know specifically the situation, what degree it is. Has the dog been murdered? Is the toys been left out? Somebody left the fridge open? There's levels of problem. But once it gets a little bit higher, I wouldn't want to simply reward silence.
Yeah.
If we just keep silent, I don't have to own up, and I don't own up, and everybody's punished. So no one gets punished. Life goes on because we're silent. You've rewarded, by no punishment, you've rewarded bad behavior. So somehow you've got to find a way that can't be rewarded. And one of the ways is that they all have to be punished to some degree. And again, you don't keep on, no food for 3 days or something until you crack, and a little light comes down and, but again, you got to try and find a way because otherwise you're rewarding bad behavior is the point. Very good. Somebody else? Yes, Pastor.
So, Pastor, if Jack was to, the model of discipline and reconciliation that you've outlined is top shelf, and I've loved when my kids were small that you deal with them and then it's dealt with, and to reconcile, everything goes back to normal, and in many cases better than before. Mm-hmm. But as they got older, and like a corporal punishment is perhaps less applicable, we went into and played around with groundings and things like that. So, but I just found them terrible because it's like everyone's punished over a long period of time. Everyone, we're going to go somewhere, but he's grounded. So, what are we going to do about that? And do you have, or she is grounded, yeah, that one, the other ones. But do you have any alternative?
It wouldn't be Jack.
No, I don't think he did get grounded. His sisters definitely did.
Yeah, there are some. I mean, again, groundings are good. I get groundings and groundings. But again, once it becomes that's not working, that's when you have to review it. So it's no longer working. I think there was one family here. One of the sons was grounded so long he couldn't get married till he was 35. Because he was grounded into his 30s. And so I think he had to get permission from Dad to be not grounded to get married and go on a honeymoon before he came back, and had to continue his groundings. He may still be grounded, I don't know. Anyway, so at some point it no longer serves its purpose. But again, I'm not going to give you a list of punishments, and you have to work it out amongst yourselves as a family. But they do work. Groundings do work. You're not going, we're not going, you can't go, your family, the kids are going, but you're not going because of such and such. But at some point, if they're grounded for 18 months, it loses its value. That is, that they can't conceive that. It's like there's no point behaving because I can't get back in the game. And so again, you've got to, that's where you realize either for that child it's not working, works for that child, not for that child, and it's somehow now it's lost its punishment value, and I've got to find something else. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's food, sometimes it's food rewards, sometimes it's whatever it is. You have to find a way of rewarding and punishing. They can't just get away with whatever they're getting away with.
So did you have any alternative that you found that worked apart from the grounding?
I belted them till I was 35. No.
That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, no, I can't think off the top of my head. There's groundings, there's go to your room. Sometimes we'd go on holidays. We're driving in the car, and it was always chaos. And so invariably, Pastor Josh spent the first day in the bathroom with the door shut while we watched television because he couldn't travel long distances. And so, but again. We did that. I think his brothers got more benefit out of that. It's almost like a reward to them that he was in the bathroom than a punishment to Josh. Anyway, you try all manner of things. I think the key is you've got to get your mind in the game, work out something that's working for you until it doesn't work, and then you change the strategy. We had family meetings as the kids got older on a regular basis, and I asked them to come up with punishments. This is the behavior that we're asking for. This is what this, and we all agree. It's not difficult to get them to agree on a behavior because they can't conceive they'd ever cross that. And so you agree to this behavior. That's the way we live. We all agree. Okay, so if we don't do that, what are we going to do? And they would come up with their own punishments. They become quite good at because they think that they're not going to do it, and the other two are going to get it. So they become quite, okay, well, I should do, yeah, because they don't conceive they'd ever do it wrong, and their brothers are going to get it, and they get to laugh at the fact that, something they created. So you just work that through. And that works for about 3 months. I think our longest season without a family meeting of sorts was probably 3 or 4 months. But then before the thing falls apart, we've got to regroup, another meeting, But it's always, this is the outcome we want. This is the behavior, we agree to this. This is the sort of people we want to be. And this is how we as a family are going to try and get that required outcome. And so that's something that families should be doing as time goes by. Very good. Somebody else? Yes.
Pastor, when you're communicating with children or kids in regards to correction and criticism, do they take things personally? And if they do or they do not, how do you teach them to not take things personally just because you have their best interests at heart, wanting to help them? Or is it maturity?
Okay, very good. One of the paraphrases / translations of Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way that he should go. One of the paraphrase, I think, which comes from Swindoll, is train up a child in the way that they should go and in accordance with their own individual bents and character traits and flaws. As you're taking into account each child and how they are uniquely put together, fearfully and wonderfully made by God. And so there are things that we're all going to do because that's the boundary, but how you communicate with each child is different. So some kids, they just take it in one sense on the chin, no problems, got it, clear cut, and on they go. Others, it's the fact they've upset mum or dad is deeply felt. And so you have to be aware that you're not treating the second child exactly the same as the first child when it comes to reconciliation. And so the boundaries are the same. The way you implement them might be slightly different in the way you word it. The outcomes are the same. And then reconciliation. Some kids need more deliberate attention to let them feel like they haven't so disappointed the family as to be booted out. And so you've got to spend more time with them. But that's an individual thing with the kids. And so, and that's taking into account what you're saying. You don't want them to get rejection issues over something that you're doing that's positive for their future. But you just have to be sensitive to that, be aware of that. And when you have kids and you begin to deal with them on an individual basis, how many parents know their kids are all different? And so you got the same outcomes, eating and sleeping, like I said in point number 1, but the way you implement that's different because they're all taking it different. And so you want the same outcome, no favorites, nobody gets away with anything, no favorites, but the way you reward and punish and reconcile is different with each child to avoid that kind of thing. Very good. Somebody else? Anybody else? Question, comment, poem, confession? Okay, last point, and this is the consequences. This is very, very important, and I want to just spend a little bit of time on this morning as we bring this particular part to a conclusion. Our church, our Potter's House Parramatta Church here began in about 1985. I came in 1990. And it would be my estimation that in this particular congregation, the Sydney area churches and to some degree the Australian Fellowship in the last 30 or 40 years, that most of the early couples, because of the size of the churches, and we're trying to establish a colony of heaven here on earth, most of the couples, the vast majority of them, followed this kind of stuff quite implicitly. And so I can't speak for everybody around the whole Australian Fellowship, but there were people saved in their early 20s, perhaps late 20s, started to have kids, and this was very much front of our minds back in that day, and most couples were fairly diligent to put those things into practice. So the phrase I've got here is that they were fairly uncompromisingly and energetically enforced, and the result of that is the next generation of parents. And so there are now kids who are in their late 20s and early 30s who are having children, but those children are the children of those early couples, and now they're raising another generation. And the challenge is that this current group of parents, whether it be Parramatta, whether it be the Sydney area of the Australian Fellowship, of course around the Fellowship, is that you're not going to have what you have unless you're willing to do what we did, if I can put it that way. And so there has to be in this group of parents that you're not just, dabbling in this. You're not messing with the system. You're not saying, well, psychologists and the latest thing and what the government is saying, and over there they've banned this and they've banned that. You've got to recognize that you are the product of those parents who uncompromisingly and energetically enforce these things that raised you to the place where you are now in church. And you're in your late 20s, you're in your early 30s, you're raising children, but you're not going to have kids like you are unless you did what your parents did to raise you. Does that make sense? And so the cycle of every movement is that for many reasons, revivals die out. And we are a rarity in the earth that the fellowship has been going since the early 70s, 50-something years, and most movements die out in the third generation. The first generation builds, the second generation gets the benefit of that, and unless they build like the first generation, by the third generation, they simply take the benefits and don't reproduce a fourth generation. And so we are somewhat unique in the earth in the sense that we have survived 50 plus years as a fellowship, and to a very large degree overall. We're obviously still maintaining momentum and evangelizing, discipling, planting churches. There's conferences every week around the globe planting churches. But never forget that cycle is wanting to break into your life, wanting to break into our church. And the things that built this church and the things that built this group of people in their 20s and 30s, you can't just abandon that and thinking you're going to get the same results, is the point. So for many reasons, revivals die out. There's doubt, distractions, disappointments, discouragement, defamation. It's the demonic. One reason why movements die out is simply parents. And a lack of parenting. And like I said, parents converted in the 80s and the 90s. Their children's converted in the 2000s and 2010s. And we're raising another generation of children, and they will inherit the kingdom. And so the job of parents, and all that we've said thus far, is to raise a generation of children. And there's kids that are right now in Sunday school that could pastor this church in the future. They're going to be Bible study leaders. They're going to be leaders in this congregation. They're going to be evangelists. They're going to be pioneers. They're going to be missionaries. And they're right now back behind that wall. But the parents, are raising them. And you want to raise them in a way that they can take the kingdom and pass it on to another thing. There's a huge responsibility on the current crop of parents that have your children living at home, that you're raising them in such a way that their children will be raised like you were raised, and their children raised like that, and the thing begins to move on. The Family Firm Institute says less than a third of family businesses survive into the second generation. Just 12% make it to the third, and just 3% reach the fourth generation or beyond. That's a frightening statistic. They're saying that family businesses somehow, mum and dad, they start a business, they get this thing going, they recruit the kids, but the kids don't take it on. And by the third or fourth generation, it's completely died out, sold off, gone, just disappeared. Well, that's true of businesses. That's can be true of churches, and certainly it can be true of Christian parents. Raising kids that just aren't quite, and then they raise kids that just aren't quite, and by the third or fourth generation, all the great-grandkids are backslidden and go their own way. As the saying goes, the first generation builds the business, the second makes it a success, and the third wrecks it. Several consequences. I'll leave you with these this morning. Any questions there, by the way? That's one of the reasons I'm preaching this stuff, is because of things that we, again, enthusiastically began to enforce back in the day when I first got saved and began to get married, have children. It's critical that those children are raising their kids much the same way. Otherwise, you're simply watering down what we do, and eventually that'll go somewhere else. Any other quick? Yes, Alana.
How much do your kids, or do they affect your eligibility for ministry and your effectiveness in ministry?
Yeah, well, well, number one, it does affect your eligibility, and there would be, it plays out in that, in your eligibility. The Bible says, let a man rule his own household. If a man can't rule his own household, how can he rule in a local church? And so there's a factor that's there. But as much as it affects your eligibility, it certainly affects your effectiveness, because there are people that would, for whatever reason, have titled ministry, or they could even be out pastoring to some degree, and somehow, their parenting skills haven't been bad enough to disqualify them, so they're now functioning in places of leadership, but their lack of parenting wisdom Effectiveness will affect their leadership, and people aren't going to follow them as closely as they perhaps would want them to because they just simply aren't diligent. Now, I'm not talking about the success of your plan. In other words, you can be I've seen good parents with bad kids. I've seen bad parents with good kids, a little rarer. But I've seen good parents with bad kids. And I don't know how that plays out. Every kid has a will. At some point, they're going to make a choice. But if the parents are obviously negligent in the process, and then their kids turn out bad, then people are going to try and follow them. They're going to say, listen, their example, my kids are at risk as well. Something about their leadership is going to play out now on my kids, and so there's going to be a little bit of a problem there. But you can be a good parent as long as you're doing this stuff and are seen to be doing this stuff. Your kids will make up their own minds one day. And not every child of good parents is going to live for God. I guess that's just something I've observed over the years. But if your parenting is in question, then that will affect your effectiveness. That make sense? So again, there are people that would not be promoted simply because their kids are out of control, and they're just not addressing it. But again, there's obviously parameters there. It's not strictly enforced in one sense, but once you are in a position, your leadership is affected by the quality of your parenting, along with another 10 or 12 qualities you're looking at. Very good. Good question. Somebody else? Yes, Renata.
So, Pastor, from grandparents' perspective, we're raising third generation now. Are they really responsibility of parents only, or there is room for grandparents' influence? And to what degree can grandparents assist?
Yeah, very good question. So a couple of things. Well, there's a law of diminishing returns. This is why it's critical that parents start as early as possible eating and sleeping routines with their kids. They're just putting something in place that they can build on as the kids turn 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and life goes on. It's a mindset. And so it's critical that they start early because there's a law of diminishing returns. As they get older, the kids get a little bit more, a little bit more like they're adults. They're becoming adults. And so then they become an adult and they're an adult. And so once the kids leave, when they're at your house, at that point there, that's the last of your real hands-on. When they're in your house, they ought to do just exactly what you want them to do in your house. Once they leave your house, there's an element of them become adults. And now you have it's almost a bit more like a mentoring role. Is you may, if you feel the need to, speak into them if they're willing to listen to it and give them some advice from time to time. So listen, I don't think you're seeing this. But it's very much, it's not strictly parenting. It's like more mentoring. It's like I'm giving you some advice from my perspective, but you're going to have to live it out yourself and live with the consequences yourself. But I'm just giving you some advice. And so that's parenting the grandkids. And so, but it's a law of diminishing returns. It's not as effective as when they were at your house and you've got the hands-on thing. It's not as effective as when they were younger and very moldable. If your kids are out of control and they're 3 and 4 years of age, there's drama ahead of you. I prophesy drama ahead. If they're out of control 3 and 4 years of age, you got drama ahead. So that's the most, that's the best you can have it to some degree. And so, but again, you speak into their lives, you give them some advice, you think, but it's not as common. I think I would speak to my boys from time to time about things that might be on my heart. But I don't know if it's every few years or something like that. If something came up, I'd speak about it right then. But just as far as a general principle, I may swerve into that every couple of years if I felt to. And but again, they're going to have to, exactly like I'm preaching, they were raised a certain way. They have to try and do their best to reproduce that in the next generation. All right, yes. Last one, Lamb, quickly. Microphone.
Pastor, you said for young, very young children, it start with eating and sleeping.
Yep.
So that's 0 to 3. So what is a good goal or a good target to aim for children from 4 to 7 from your experience?
Oh, well, everything else. Then it becomes toys, then it becomes attitude, then it becomes just whatever you see. It's not like you can plan it out to some degree, but as you're living life, there are certain things you want them to do. I'm going to get them to participate in the song service. I'm going to get them to stand up in the song service, then they sit down and play. I'm going to get them to do so. You just, as they begin to grow up and begin to explore their own world and their life begins to expand, you recognize, hey, that's probably not something that's good for them to do that. And so eating and sleeping are the two most obvious early childhood things that you begin to channel them in a certain direction, which is good for the parents to think that stuff through. It's good for the kid to recognize I've got this life functions best inside boundaries, as I've said there, and you're guiding them. But as again, toys, putting toys away, sleeping when they're supposed to sleep, speak to adults. Any kind of behavior. I want you in the shopping center. Can you walk with me? I don't want you racing around, running your hands down through the tins of baked beans and put. I'm saying you just bring what you see. You just bring it into those kinds of boundaries. Very good. Okay. Several consequences of well-formed enforced boundaries. Number one, you are helping your kids make good choices. The law of sowing and reaping has been in operation since the garden, and it ought to be in operation in their whole lives. And so you're teaching them that if I make good choices, there's good results. If I make poor choices, there's a poor result. And so you're, as a parent, reinforcing in them this law of sowing and reaping. And so if I sow only good seed and avoid at all costs sowing bad seed, my life goes better. You teach that when they're 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That should be in operation when they're 24, 25 and 26. You're teaching them that good choices. The second thing is it helps them to recognize authority. Is that they don't get, they're not the masters of their own fate. They're living in a hierarchy of leadership, and mum and dad at that point, they are God in their lives. And so you're teaching them about authority. And at some point, that authority then is shared with teachers. It's shared with police, it's shared with government authorities, the tax office, their boss, local church leadership, and ultimately God himself. They've got to recognize that life functions in a hierarchy of authority that they will one day transfer to God. God is in control. I give an account to God. And so they've learned that by steps you've put in their lives from a young age. And so this all has a purpose, ultimately their conversion, ultimately their submission to God and God's will for their lives. And so when you allow them to be an authority to themselves, then they carry that and then they won't submit themselves to God. And so you're actually threatening the concept of submission to God when you refuse to bring authority into their lives. The third thing, it helps them to develop discipline and self-restraint. Do yourself a favor at some point and look up the marshmallow principle. And you would have heard that in sermons before. There's something about kids that are able to restrain the reward of a second marshmallow and so forth. You can look it up yourself. If they will have the idea, you get one marshmallow. If you can not eat that for 10 minutes, we'll give you a second marshmallow. Those kids at a very young age that have that sense of self-restraint, they follow them over 40 years, they become more successful adults. Just because they can restrain themselves and not give in to every, primal urge. And so you're teaching them that as an adult. And like I said, there are unlikable kids. They're unlikable because their parents have never taught them discipline and restraint. When you have unlikable children, that is 100% a parenting problem. and other people don't like your kids, the teachers at the school don't like your kids, their boss won't like your kids, their future marriage partner won't like their kids, and then they repeat the cycle in another generation. And so you're teaching them discipline and restraint, and you can't just do what you want all the time. And you're helping with that with boundaries. The fourth thing is helps them to get saved and make heaven their home. The ultimate reward of good parenting is your kids get saved and submit themselves to God's leadership and begin to live for Him the rest of their life. That's the reward of good parenting. I thank God for getting A's. Thank God for getting good jobs. Thank God for lots of other more temporal rewards. But the benefit of good parenting is that your kids get saved. They live for God and they make heaven their home. Susanna Wesley, who raised 9 children, including John and Charles Wesley, put it this way: the parent who studies to subdue self-will in his child works together with God in the renewing and the saving of a soul. The parent who indulges it does the devil's work, makes religion impossible, salvation unattainable, and does all that in him lies to damn his child's soul and body forever. That's pretty straightforward. The Methodists had it pretty clear cut. She raised a lot of kids, and she says, you are restraining them, you're doing God's work. When you simply allow them to do what they want, you're doing the devil's work, and you may damn their soul for eternity. We'll leave it right there. We have another study next week. I'm going to talk about teenagers and releasing kids into the wider world. We have church in about 10 minutes.